agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how you doing this morning?
After the week I've had, I'm more full of holes than the Steele dossier. But, we'll get to that.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that. So but we are going to be talking about all kinds of Trump-related things, and I think that might take up a good part of our show today. But if we do have any time, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the economy and OPEC Plus and their cuts, and maybe even, I don't know if we probably won't have time for this, but National Pork Producers Council is up in arms against California, and that's I think
and rightly so.
Before the Supreme Court. So, yeah, but we have a bunch to get to, and we are going to get to it in just 1 second. Okay, Jay. So, do you want to kick us off here with our first story for today?
Sure. Our first story, Mike. On Thursday, the January 6th committee voted unanimously to subpoena Donald J. Trump and both his testimony and records. Chairman Benny Thompson said, we'd like, in a sort of what is the understatement of the series, we'd like to hear from him. It is our obligation to seek Donald Trump's testimony. Subpoena to the former president is a serious and extraordinary affair. Trump, for his part, responded the following day in what the New York Times headline writers described as a 14-page rambling response full of restating false claims and conspiracy theories. But he did not definitively state whether or not he will appear to testify. So that's sort of as we left it there. Now, I did see something about now there's hints that Trump says he may testify if it's broadcast live or something like that, which obviously all makes for the good TV that this has been leading up to. So what are your thoughts, Mike, on, I guess, where we are with the January 6th committee and Trump's testimony and documents in particular?
Well, I would be surprised if Trump actually testified, right? I mean, I think that's just Trump being Trump, but it seems to me that that's unlikely to happen, and that vote to subpoena him essentially is a symbolic sort of thing. I think it was something that the committee should have done, because of course it would be weird to not try to get his testimony to hear from him. But my expectation is that he'll be able to successfully fight that subpoena, at least up until the point where this session of Congress ends, and at which point I'm fairly certain Republicans will be in the majority, and then that subpoena will not be renewed. In fact, the committee will not even be a thing at that point. So that's kind of where I'm at least in terms of Trump testimony. I would be surprised to see him appear before the committee, because in that sense, it would almost be acknowledging in some way that this is any sort of a legitimate form, and I just can't see Donald Trump doing that. What do you think?
So there is that. On the fighting the subpoena, I'm not. I suppose, technically fight is sort of a funny word, right? I mean, he could simply not comply, at which point they'd vote to hold him in contempt. And then he'd have to sort of avoid the federal marshals or avoid, showing up in the Capitol, being subject to arrest or something like that. So I don't think the Justice Department would go so far as to try to arrest a former president for contempt of Congress for not appearing. But that could be wrong.
I think there's a legal, you can argue there's a separation of powers claim that Trump can raise. I was thinking about this, and Harry Truman, after he had ended his time as president, he actually was subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he refused to comply with that subpoena. And in kind of a private, not a public statement, but a private letter, he wrote, if the doctrine of separation of powers and the independence of the presidency is to have any validity at all, it must be equally applicable to a president after his term of office has expired. when he sought to be examined with respect to any acts occurring while he is president. And while I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I think certainly that's not an unreasonable argument. And again, my larger point is I think it's enough of an argument that certainly could delay any sort of action until after January of 2023. Again, at which point
I did not know that about Truman.
I didn't either. Yeah. Shocking.
And I would say that's a better argument than the executive privilege argument.
Yeah.
Asserting against the Justice Department.
Yeah, I think
there's more of a constitutional hook here, as you suggested, as Truman suggested, because it's different branches of government, and that also leads back to the precedents on this, right? Involving Nixon and so forth. That again was congressional subpoenas as opposed to your own Justice Department.
Right.
So no, I think that's a valid point. Although I'd say times were different back then.
Yeah. Certainly.
And
well, that was just another witch hunt, right? That was just a different kind of witch, not the greatest witch hunt in history, because of course that is
right.
This,
well, pretty good witch hunt.
Yeah, well, it wasn't bad as witch hunts go. Yeah, exactly. So, but there's, I mean, if we kind of pull back from that and think about the January 6th committee in general, because they're wrapping things up at this point, it seems to me one thing to point out from the last week, there were these claims of Trump's former communications director, Alyssa Farah, right? She testified that Trump said to her, "Can you believe that I lost to this effing guy?" Now, right. It seems to me that
doesn't strike me as particularly probative of anything.
Exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about that, right? And there are a couple ways, depending on how it was said. It could be Trump just saying, knowing that he lost, or just saying like, "Can you really believe that I lost?" And I think that's more of a Trumpian thing. But then again, there's also that was combined with testimony from an aide to Mark Meadows, who was Trump's former chief of staff. And she said that Meadows told her, "A lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it." So now that, of course.
Yeah, no, that's more probative.
Yeah. But then again, I'm sure Mark Meadows, if he were to testify, and he's refused to do so, I'm sure he would say, "No, I didn't say anything like that." So, but if Meadows were to for some reason corroborate that, then I think this changes things a lot, because you and I have talked a lot about Donald Trump and this idea that, the argument of, well, it's not a lie if you believe it, right? And so if Trump has a legitimately, even if a diluted belief, that what he was doing was serving the cause of justice and democracy and fighting a fraudulent election result, well, that's different than if he says, "No, of course I lost, but I'm going to," then all of a sudden that opens up some serious, legal peril for him. And so, but again, I don't think that there's nearly enough here to pin that on Donald Trump legally, even if we might have our suspicions about that.
Well, and the difficulty is that you have to prove that Donald Trump is not delusional.
Yeah, and that's a high bar. Yeah, that's
exactly. That's a tough thing to prove. In terms of the rest of I think he's got a couple different options as far as one, he could show up and take the fifth. If I were his lawyer, that's what I would recommend he do. I don't see him doing that. That just doesn't seem his style. And he'd have all the things of people in the past saying, "Well, if you take the fifth, that says you're guilty," and all that. Or he could put on the greatest show on earth, which would seem more like him. So yeah, I'm not sure what how this goes. But I mean, I think that's just the January 6th committee was heading towards this is the grand finale, season cliffhanger kind of thing.
And so when Donald Trump on Truth Social said, "Why didn't the Unselect Committee ask me to testify months ago?" It's like, come on, he knows the answer to that. It's that
it wouldn't be a good television.
No, exactly. That wouldn't be a good show at all. So yeah, but it seems to me, in looking back at what the committee has done, because this is pretty much it for the committee.
I mean, it's not an unreasonable criticism. if you're poking holes like I've tended to do, that
Sure.
is this really an exercise in trying to get to the bottom and find out the truth of what happened, or is it a political exercise?
It can be both.
Oh no, it certainly can be both. But listen, I mean, if you could make the argument of listen, the first thing we need to do is find out what Donald Trump did and said and get his stuff. But there's also, I can see strategic reasons for not doing that, because there's sometimes you want to build the case, find out more stuff that you need to look for before you send that, the other subpoena.
Exactly. I think from that standpoint, saying, well, listen, we have all these people who said this. So you're saying all of these Republicans, these people who supported you, are lying. Everyone is lying, but exact. So but I really do think, in looking back at the committee as a whole, that they did, I think, establish fairly clearly, at least in my mind, certain things. For one, that a whole bunch of Trump's top folks told him he'd lost. And despite that, right, he told lies. He advanced these conspiracy theories. And not only that, but we know, based on this testimony, that for actually months before the election, that he planned to claim fraud if he lost, regardless of what else was, of the facts, basically. And that he pressured multiple officials, both at the state level and, his vice president, people in the Department of Justice, to ignore vote totals and find a way to declare him the winner. And then finally, on 1/6, he, in some ways, you can argue, encouraged the mob and certainly didn't do anything to really stop their attack when he knew it was underway. And I think, to me, all those things are fairly incontrovertible. I wanted to see if you had a different take on them.
No, I think that's right. Again, I think the question is, how do you paint it? Is it Trump intentionally trying to subvert democracy, or Trump being deluded enough to believe I could not have lost to this bozo absent some sort of fraud, so therefore a fraud must exist, so therefore you need to find it. In terms of, I would actually say I'm a little I am surprised by as much substance as there was in the January 6th actual findings thus far. And to point, because I think more of just like historical interest, right, of what was really happening behind the scenes, that sort of stuff. I didn't think we would learn that much, but we did, and it's interesting. What did he say to the Secret Service people? Did he try to grab the wheel? All those kind of things. I think it painted what I would say an interesting behind the scenes picture of what was happening on that day. Did it shed any light on whether he encouraged the mob to storm a Capitol? Again, I don't know. I don't see that, right? So I guess what I'm saying is I'm giving the January 6th committee sort of a C+.
No, there you go. That's not bad, given that.
I had expected to be sort of a completely partisan hackery kind of thing. Now, where I will, where the demerits are for them, are certainly things where I think there were steps in the process and statements from the committee that indicated this was not a, hey, let's get to the truth. It was a, let's burn down Donald Trump. I think that hurts the committee's credibility. I think you do a better job hurting Donald Trump at the end of the day if you can say, listen, we dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's. Again, Joe Friday rather than Roscoe Coltrane. Also, there were some weird lapses. I think of there's calling in Cassidy Hutchinson, who said, listen, this is what I heard. And it was sort of like second-hand hearsay, which, again, this isn't a courtroom, so fair enough. You can bring that in. But then not calling the witnesses who would have been firsthand witnesses to those alleged statements. Some of that sort of stuff. And then also doing things like subpoenaing Ginny Thomas, who, I'm not sure what exactly she would have to do with any of this. other than it was a Democratic opportunity to try to embarrass Clarence Thomas, and that sort of thing. I think detracted from what the committees, could have done. So.
On that, I would argue that if the partner of a Supreme Court justice, and by the way, the lone dissenter in one important decision in a case relating to this was an active participant in, or at least an active urger, I don't know if an urger, that's to various high government officials to do things to subvert democracy. I think that's someone who should be heard from them, because I certainly don't buy Clarence Thomas's arguments that, well, my wife has her own opinions, but certainly my wife has no influence on me whatsoever. That would be a rather unusual marital relationship, I would think, certainly. But that's a side point. I think overall, it seems to me that this hasn't had much of an effect on people's opinions. Certainly, public opinion polling suggests that we're pretty much where we were. And you could even make a case that the committee gave Donald Trump kind of what he wanted, right? The media spotlight. And so I guess to me, there are a couple of questions. One is, will the Justice Department, will Merrick Garland choose to prosecute? And if so, what crimes might Donald Trump be plausibly charged with? And from what I understand, committee investigators are looking at two things in particular. The first is wire fraud, and that would be if you raised money based on stolen election claims that are false. And then secondly, obstructing Congress by attempting, to stop the certification of electoral votes. If my thinking is, if those are the two best things you have, based on what I've seen, I certainly would be reluctant to take that to trial, or even to try to get an indictment on that. But I don't know. What do you think, Jay?
First, the chances that the committee makes a criminal referral, 100%.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. It's like
but I'm saying just as it was on January 7th.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
Yeah.
There was no way the committee was not going to say, "Hey, Justice Department, you should look into prosecuting him." That was foregone conclusion.
Yeah. There's no way the committee is going to back. Yeah, it turns out Trump didn't do anything wrong whatsoever.
We're good. Yeah,
we apologize.
Yeah, exactly.
So does Garland take it up? Again, I think the likelihood of a Trump indictment is 100%.
Really?
Whether it's on those claims or on the Mar-a-Lago claims.
Well, that's different. Yeah,
I different.
I want to separate.
I'm saying is if you're going to indict him, I think it makes more sense to do one great big indictment, right, than the piecemeal sort of thing. So my thing is if they're going to indict Donald Trump on the Mar-a-Lago document issues, I would think that there might be some thought to at least including that stuff from the January 6th committee as well.
Yeah, I don't see that
now.
Again,
I would tell you, I almost made this bet with you a week or so ago, and now I'm glad I didn't, because I would have lost. But my prediction was that there would be an indictment on the Mar-a-Lago documents basically by this week.
And I would have been stunned by that, just because that would have gone against Justice Department protocol for that sort of thing. But
yeah, that would have been my bet. So that but I still think absolutely there's going to be an indictment, no question about it.
I am far less. I am far less certain. I think that there's a better than 50% chance that there will be an indictment on the documents thing, and we'll talk about. I know we'll get to that story in a minute. But on the directly January 6th thing, I do not think there's going to be an indictment on that. That's my prediction.
Okay.
So
all right, I'll take that. No, I'll take that. I'll take that action.
Okay. One other thing I was thinking of. Okay. So what I was thinking about is if I were in Biden's position, I would have seriously considered, given what at least what I know about the evidence, I would have seriously considered pardoning Donald Trump for any crimes related to January 6th, because I'm thinking, number one, it would have put Trump in the position of either accepting the pardon. And of course, if you accept the pardon, that's kind of an implicit, regardless of what you say, right, of like, well, I couldn't. Or he could refuse the pardon, which I, certainly would guess he would do, right? But still, that makes Joe Biden look like this to at least any kind of middle of the road folks, like this magnanimous sort of, hey, he offered to just kind of let's move on and the healing must begin sort of thing. And so I don't know. I mean,
I would have said the odds of Joe Biden pardoning Donald Trump now or ever are zero.
Right. I'm not right. I'm saying that if I were in that position, I might have done that. Especially again, if you think, well, I guess what I'm saying is, if you think that the evidence is so weak that you're not going to get a conviction anyway, why not just get the political capital out of issuing a pardon? Though I'm sure you're saying that the left flank would just revolt over that.
I would say you lose political capital. You would absolutely enrage your base.
Yeah. There are folks. You're right, and maybe that's why I'm not a progressive Democrat.
I think there's a substantial portion of the Democratic base that voted for Joe Biden specifically because they wanted to see Donald Trump prosecuted.
Yeah, well, that's I guess I wasn't in that portion exact. I don't mind seeing him prosecuted as long as there's something.
Certainly, they're out there.
Yeah, I'm not saying that Donald Trump doesn't deserve to be behind bars, but I'm saying I certainly on the January 6th stuff, I don't think that from what I've seen, that there's a case where beyond a reasonable doubt, you can say that, he did any of the things that, because there's that delusional thing we've talked about before. So but
here's the thing, though. I think you have, there has been a whole lot of effort put into, look, what this, midterms about, Republicans are saying, and, the economy, sort of the fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
Democrats are pushing, well, it's abortion and threat to democracy. That's what I'm saying. The whole Donald Trump is a threat to democracy is a keystone of the platform at this point.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that has to be included in any indictment.
I think it's just the opposite, because I think that Garland's going to want to separate these two things, because it's going to look, especially if there's any sort of actual trial, this would happen, in the time leading up to the presidential election, given all the inevitable delays and this sort of thing. And I feel fairly confident that they would not be able to convict Donald Trump on any of the January 6th things. And so that would just not only give him all this publicity, but add fuel to the fire of this sort of claims that this is the greatest witch hunt in the history of the known universe sort of thing. And so I think Merrick Garland is too smart to do that sort of thing. And I guess you don't.
Oh, no, I'm not saying he's not, he's not too smart to not do that. I'm saying I think he needs that other stuff as well.
Gotcha.
I think if
when you think
otherwise you get the Trump defense, right? If let's play this out. And if I'm advising Team Trump, and I'm going to get all kinds of crap for this, just because I'm saying hypothetically this is how this is going to work.
Sure.
But he's charged with mishandling classified documents. He is not indicted for threatening democracy, all this kind of other stuff. Trump will rightfully say, "Oh, come on, this is exactly what you tried to prosecute. What you let Hillary Clinton off the hook for, witch hunt, all that. It's playing into that thing." So that's why the Justice Department, I think, would need to have the other piece or other pieces to it.
Yeah. I disagree, because the Clinton thing was entirely different. And so Donald Trump is going to lie and exaggerate and be his usual irresponsible, horrific self, no matter what. And so to me, the key thing is what actually can they get a conviction on, potentially, plausibly. And I think it would be a horrible mistake for the Justice Department to charge him with anything that they don't have a very, very firm belief that they have a great shot of getting conviction on. So that's my prediction. My prediction is that there will be an indictment on the documents thing, and your prediction is that there will, but it will also include some of the January 6th. It will also include,
elements of January 6th.
We will find out. So why don't we take just a quick break and then get back to actually that Trump document sort of thing. So there were some developments on that. Okay, Jay. So why don't we move on to that related story about those Trump documents?
So continuing on Thursday as being Donald's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. In addition to the subpoena from the January 6th committee, as some commentators refer to them, the illegitimate, corrupt Trump court issued a unsigned order rejecting Trump's limited appeal of the 11th Circuit's go-ahead. This is sort of getting backwards, right? Essentially saying that, no, the 11th Circuit is correct, and the Justice Department can move forward with examining the 100 or so documents that Trump had claimed they could not examine. So it's a fairly narrow ruling just on that one piece of it.
Well, then let me just jump in, because it wasn't even about. In fact, Trump's attorneys weren't even challenging whether or not the Justice Department could use those documents. They were just saying that
whether
the special master should be able to review them, which is like so narrow. It's like if it were a slice of pie, it would leave you hungry after eating. Yeah. Anyways, but so. But
the upshot is it goes directly to the Justice Department.
It's weird to me, Jay. And you're an attorney, so I want to ask you on this. But it seems to me that one sentence order that I read, that we all read, right? I don't exactly see how this is the stunning rebuke that the New York Times called it, unless you believe that essentially the Supreme Court is in the pocket of Donald Trump. To me, it was just like, well, there's not a lot of merit to this. I think how the Washington Post put it, they called it a quick and sharp rejection of the emergency request. I'm like, that seems about right. But stunning rebuke, like, no, unless you expect the court to just fall all over Donald Trump. But they really haven't on
legitimate,
any of these
corrupt
things.
Trump court.
So,
And look, the order was essentially unanimous, given that it's unsigned. There's no opinions, but there were no dissents from it, and it is issued out of the court's shadow docket, and which, again, that's sort of a silly name for the court's emergency docket. And quite honestly, most emergency petitions to the Supreme Court are rejected in the exact same fashion, right? In just a one word, no. So I didn't see it as a stunning rebuke or shocking. In fact, I believe I predicted this, that this would be the result. And I think it's probably the right result. But I'm also believe that I think it's correct that it's this U.S. Supreme Court that made that final right decision.
But in the end, I mean, it's not really a big deal. It's more of a delaying tactic than anything else. And so I think it's just Donald Trump's
delaying tactic on Trump's part.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Trump.
Yeah. It's not. It's the Supreme Court isn't delaying anything.
No. Yeah. And so.
Yeah. What Donald Trump was seeking essentially what would have been a delay.
Yeah.
That I suppose theoretically, the special master could have come up and said, okay, well, some of these documents are privileged, and therefore they don't. Justice Department, you can't see them. Even so, if he had made that decision, then Trump would have gone back to the trial court saying, listen, special master got it wrong. The special master that I demanded be appointed got it wrong, so I need you to fix that. And then that would have been appealed and all that. Right. So,
But it seems to me that of more import this week was, and this, I think you and I both predicted this a few weeks ago, that the Justice Department, in fact, filed an appeal with the 11th Circuit, arguing that the special master itself, the whole setup, should be essentially ended, and that Judge Cannon exceeded her authority, discretion in doing so, because basically the distinction is that the Justice Department is arguing that there is, even Judge Cannon said, there's no evidence, there's no clear indication that Donald Trump's constitutional rights were egregiously violated. And they've said all along that that's the test. If that's not the case, then you can just have the standard sort of filter team in place, and that's fine.
That's the test for essentially invoking the court's equitable jurisdiction to do things like appoint a special master.
Yeah, and that's a bigger deal because there are like over 11,000 of these documents, and that would actually, if the 11th Circuit ruled that the Justice Department was in fact right, that would potentially speed things up a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know how, well, I was going to say I don't know how big of a deal it is, but then then again this week we had, there was this security camera footage showing that Trump, I guess he was a former valet who then went to work for Trump, Walt Nauta, moving boxes from a storage room, apparently both before and after the Department of Justice's subpoena, and there are reports that someone saying to the Department of Justice, it might have been Nauta, but it hasn't been confirmed, that the documents were removed personally at the specific direction of Donald Trump. And there are reportedly multiple people who've said this, but even that, I mean, that certainly is, that's not something you want to, if you're Donald Trump, that's not evidence you want, right? But it also seems to me that Donald Trump could claim, well, I got the subpoena and I said, well, I want to take a look at these documents and make sure I get them all together, so I'll move them to my office, kind of thing. So I think maybe a little bit too much have been made of this. I'm not saying that Donald Trump...
Right, and it could be probative of something, but it also could be explained away fairly easily.
Yeah, and that's, again, I think it's important to separate out sort of legal arguments from what we maybe think is happening. So what will be plausible for you to argue legally as opposed to what we actually think, and I tend to think that, well, if Donald Trump has gotten a subpoena for some documents, he'd want to take a look, get those documents so he could flush as many down the toilet or do whatever he does with pieces of paper as is his, thing. But he could easily just claim, no, I just wanted to personally prepare them because I'm so committed to making sure the DOJ has the right stuff, whatever. But So,
and keep in mind the bigger defense that Trump will invoke when all this comes to fruition is, I have a right to keep those documents anyway.
Yeah, which of course is a ridiculous argument. I mean, there's no
right, but no, Al, I wouldn't say it's entirely ridiculous. I think Presidential Records Act, he can have an argument to say, listen, as former president, I ought to have access and be able to keep and review these things as needed. I think there is a defense there. I don't know that he wins on that defense,
I think that's weak. Yeah, okay, I see.
But I think it's a non-frivolous defense.
Yeah, I guess I think the counter argument is, well, there's a big difference between the National Archives taking custody of these records and putting them in temporary storage facilities while they go through them, and Donald Trump just kind of stashing them in a I don't know, underneath the pool table in Mar-a-Lago or something like that. Yeah. Two very, and Donald Trump has been pointing toward.
But I think the argument is, well, all right, tell me in the Presidential Record Act where it says you can't put it under the pool table at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah,
and
I think the point would be, well, the act says that you don't get to keep them yourself; they are actually the government's documents, and you are not the government anymore, regardless of how
How'd you get to borrow them?
Yeah. Well, anyway.
I was just borrowing.
Yeah.
No, and again, I'm not making that.
No. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's what the argument's going to be. And in which case, the people moving them around the place it would be irrelevant. Something, and this is something I wanted to get your thoughts on, and I just have been thinking about this since the search warrant came out on the documents. Is I don't understand. I mean, to some extent, Donald Trump portrays himself as very much this streetwise kind of guy, but he seems in other ways either one incredibly naive politically, or two just has sort of this appetite for self-destruction. If if that self-destruction comes with the spotlight, right? Then it's still okay. Just because this whole document thing to me seems.
I see what you're saying, but I disagree. I think if anything, my initial guess would be that this is very calculated because the government asked for these documents. Donald Trump says, "Hell no, this will be a great way for me to demonstrate how they're going after me."
Yeah,
and so no, I think it's a smart strategic move.
Well, and I would say, well, the third possibility is sort of combining that with just getting really bad legal advice.
Yeah, except I think
that can be the case.
So I think legally this is a loser, but politically it's a big winner because what could he potentially be convicted of? Mishandling classified documents? Okay, that's pretty. In the end, it's not going to be. I think there's going to be kind of end with a whimper and not a bang. And so the political mileage Donald Trump's been able to get out of this so far exceeds any sort of legal cost he's going to pay that this is a no-brainer, I think, for Donald Trump. And so
that's where I disagree. I think he could well end up in jail.
I don't. Yeah, I would. Oh, if okay, I will say if that does happen, you're definitely right. If Donald Trump ends up in jail, certainly, then that was a miscalculation. I think he's correctly calculating that chances of that happening are so small, and the potential political gain is so far outweighs that. But yeah,
see to me, because I guess maybe it looks like, because I'm again, when he's talking about doing something that is putting himself in potential criminal jeopardy.
Yeah.
For absolutely zero gain, right?
Well, that's the part of it I disagree with. I
documents in a box.
I see the gain.
I'm talking about the gain that what gain he would get from having the document.
Oh yeah, the documents are just the MacGuffin here. They're not even. Yeah. They're not important to the story as far as Donald Trump's concerned. Right. It could be anything. Yeah. So
right, it's just the thing that we're going to fight over. And he wants to have a fight in order to keep his name in front of the on the front page and be in front of the cameras. So that I get, and to some extent I can see so that's why you do stuff like fight a committee subpoena, right? Where you're not really in any kind of criminal jeopardy, and you can stand up and say, look, this is all political. These are, it's a fixed committee and all that sort of stuff. And, separation of powers. And look, you'd be right. You'd have a good case to argue there. But you just have a much less good case to argue of, well, I'm keeping these documents because I want to keep them because they're mine. And not, to me, that would seem to be, if you want to have a fight, fine, but your risks in the fight over the documents far outweigh the benefits that you could get
I think
from them. And that's something that just perplexed me from the beginning of whether it's or whether he really is. Again, to me, the naivete, and this sounds strange applying this to Donald Trump.
I think I'll suggest that you're more than a little bit more risk averse than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has. That's true. Donald Trump has made a great career for himself by taking big risks, often usually with other people's money, but still, But
usually there's civil risks. Again, it's risks with money. It's not actual criminal.
Yeah, I hope you're right on this. Risk. I mean, I the idea of Donald Trump.
It's not a matter of right or wrong. I mean, I'm just puzzled by.
I'm just wondering
what was he thinking?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think he's thinking that there's a vanishingly small chance that he'll end up in jail. So he's okay with that, though. I'm getting images in my head of how his, orangeness would set off against an orange jumpsuit or something like that. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting image in my head. Anyway, but there's one other aspect of this, Jay, I wanted to talk about. There have been a bunch of leaks in this investigation, and I got to say, I get that it's difficult to impossible to stop leaks entirely, but I feel like, I feel like maybe Attorney General Garland should have at some point made some kind of a public statement about the inappropriateness of leaking details about an ongoing investigation. I'm sure that that goes against Department of Justice regulations. I'm sure it's something that DOJ employees can be disciplined or terminated for. And I think I went through the statute, U.S. Code. I think you could possibly even make the case that in certain instances it might constitute obstruction of justice. But I don't know. There's been too many leaks for me to feel entirely comfortable with. And again, I feel like maybe Garland and even President Biden should have said something about that. I think that just would have been the right sort of thing to do. And I haven't really heard that, and I'm disappointed in that.
Oh, I would agree, and I'd take it one step farther that the leaks are part of the strategy.
Yeah, and I have a problem with that. So yeah, I don't think that's okay to do. I would have liked to have thought I would have taken a higher road had I been in Garland's or Biden's position. And again, that's not to say that you can find out who's doing the leaking, but at least you should come out and say, hey, there are all these leaks, and that's not okay.
at least make it, yes, at least, yeah.
Because even if it's part of your strategy,
hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue.
Yeah,
yes.
There you go. So we can at least do that. So, but you're saying that, in other words, I think that people are leaking certainly because they're, anti-Trump and they think he's guilty and want to see him in that orange jumpsuit. But are you saying that you think maybe that's part of the strategy from Garland on down?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I don't.
And I would say I think that's par for the course with a lot of these types of investigations, right? And that's what's always a little troubling, right? If you're the defendant, and you can't say anything, you can't do anything, but the other side can just put stuff out here and there, put out feelers, put out trial balloons, that sort of thing. And look, maybe even if it isn't. Garland sitting in his office saying, "You know what we'll do? Let's leak this." To your point, there haven't been any strong condemnations of any of this leaking, which might give someone down the line the sense that this is something that is okay.
I guess maybe,
or if not okay, will not be vigorously prosecuted.
And I guess maybe that's just one of the things where nobody sees any political benefit and they see some political downside to doing that. But there's that. Here's me being naive, thinking like, well, it'd be the right thing to do. So, oh my God, that's not a consideration, right? But anyway,
yeah, no, and I'm always I'm going to go back on the record on this that if you want to do something really, really big, like convicting a former president, one who got nearly 50% of the vote in the last election and still has a very strong political following and is sort of the front runner to be the next presidential candidate. I mean, you want to do it clean.
Yeah. You want to do it super clean. And I would argue that not only do you want to do it clean, but it better be something big, because the precedent that this sets is really, really bad. And I get the arguments. I understand that in theory, no one is above the law, but that's sort of that's in theory. And in reality, you have to think about the consequences of your actions, even if they are maybe right, even if you do think that there is good reason to believe that Donald Trump broke certain laws. I think you still have to ask, well, what if we do this? What does this mean for the presidency?
The damage to the system.
Exactly. And I understand that a lot of folks say it doesn't matter. You have to do the right thing. But that's why I think there are a lot of, maybe that's why I'm a little bit less sure that there actually will be any indictments, though I think on balance there will be, because of that. I'd like to think that the Justice Department, Attorney General Garland, is considering these things, and that weighs as a factor in his thinking.
So this is a little, maybe going back topic-wise, retrogressing back to the January 6th committee.
Yeah, that's right.
But I was thinking, to your Truman point, there was a president who appeared to testify before Congress, a sitting president, and that was Gerald Ford.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he did so voluntarily. And this is post-Watergate. But I think that's sort of, and then also you look at what this conversation is reminding me of is also the other Ford president precedent of pardoning Nixon, sort of for those very same reasons that you and I just talked about. Is listen, there may well have been a crime that could have been indicted and prosecuted, but the damage to the system would have been significant. And I think in retrospect, a lot of folks, who were critical of Ford at the time for that pardon, expressed that, listen, that was the wise thing to do at that point in time in American history, where we're dealing with the fallout from Watergate, the retreat from Vietnam, really a divided country. That was the proper step to take.
Right. But in this case, I think, as I suggested, Donald Trump almost certainly wouldn't accept the pardon, even if that was something Joe Biden were inclined to do. And so it would kind of render that moot, because then, if there were a case that Garland wanted to pursue, he would still go ahead and pursue that. So, but yeah, I think that's a good historical precedent to look back on. And I agree that President Ford did the right thing, even if it did cost him a second term, though I don't necessarily think that that's what cost him.
Yeah, I think he was going to lose anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So why not? So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about we just take one more quick break and then get back to, a third story that's kind of related to all this, at least indirectly. Okay. All right, Jay. So why don't we? We haven't talked about the Durham investigation in a while, but we actually have something to talk about with that this week, don't we?
Yeah. So more legal ongoings in D.C. There's actually the trial winding up in the Durham investigation. Trial of Igor Danchenko. Is it Igor or is it Igor?
I always say Igor. I don't know. Let's go.
I always say Igor too. And then I thought we should do that. Have like the little Marty Feldman from
there you go.
Young Frankenstein's with Igor. You can put that in post production.
Absolutely.
The case is going to the jury. There late Friday. One count against Danchenko was dismissed relating to lying against the FBI, and the entire case is about lying to the FBI. Danchenko is an analyst in Washington at the Rand Corporation, and studying Russian issues. And he was named as the main source in the Steele dossier. So it was an investigation into whether he lied to the FBI on various aspects of the Steele dossier. And I'll tell you, I'm not, looking at the evidence, Mike, of what's come forth. I'm not sure they get him on all the lying to the FBI stuff. But that said, I think the integrity of the Steele dossier is certainly harmed by this, which is probably the bigger point than getting a conviction against Danchenko. So I guess we'll go into that of what your thoughts are. But I have a couple highlights, I guess, would be that one, we learned that the FBI had offered sort of money to say, listen, if anybody can corroborate this stuff, we'll give you $1 million.
Yeah.
And they could not. So the indictment the indictment is more about seeking to indict the FBI, if you will, than to convict Danchenko.
Yeah, I think my overall take, because Durham investigation is winding down now, and clearly it was a big disappointment for folks who hoped that Durham would uncover some extensive deep state conspiracy, right? Because it ended up just with 3 indictments. Michael Sussman, who was acquitted of lying to the FBI.
False statements, yeah.
Right. There was that FBI attorney who pulled out the whiteout and changed the...
Kleinsmith.
Yeah, exactly. And now he actually took a plea deal to avoid jail time, and then Danchenko. And so there haven't really been any high or even kind of medium level indictments. And that's a disappointment, I think, to a lot of folks who were hoping for more. I guess my take overall is that it's hard to deny that, even if you're looking at this charitably, and I'm trying to, that this was a sloppy investigation by the FBI, that at best they cut corners, and in some instances, right, that one instance at least, violated the law, and they relied far too much on information that I think they should have far more carefully vetted. That said, I don't think it was some sort of, they all got together and said, let's take down Donald Trump, that sort of thing. I think it was probably more like, well, here's this potentially massive and novel threat, right? There are claims that don't seem ridiculous that we have a major party nominee who's cooperating with, with the Russians. Now, by the way, if we can nail this guy on this, who, we don't really like anyway, wow, isn't that a career maker? And so, well, let's go after this aggressively. And if we cut a few corners, we cut a few corners. And I think that was certainly a mistake, and in some instances was actually, violated the law. And so that's kind of my take on the whole. What Durham has found is that, and while it's disappointing to the folks who wanted a whole bunch of people put in jail, I think it does kind of show that the FBI did not handle this well at all, even in the most charitable kind of view of this.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I would go further, and because I do think whether you say was there a conspiracy of, hey, let's get this guy, I think that's extremely difficult to prove. But I think the second point you make is, here's somebody we don't like anyway. Let's see if we can nail him. I certainly think that is an issue, right? I think that's well, out there, and that's been apparent. I guess a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that the extent to which I think that's human nature, where if you're going after someone, whether you're in any kind of law enforcement capacity, if you dislike them, it gives you a little more kind of oomph, right? I mean, so
absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But to me, I mean, the issues that trouble me are things like, listen, it's now apparent that early on, the FBI knew that the dossier was not could not be corroborated. They tried; they couldn't come up with any corroborating evidence. Yet they kept the FBI clearly could have said at some point, listen, we've done a lot of work on this. We've looked at this. And you know what? There's nothing to it. And instead, Kleinsmith et al. Altered records to go to the FISA court to get a warrant. That's what's troubling. And they renewed that warrant, I think 3 or 4 times for like 90 days each.
Well, I wonder, Jay, if there's a point at which you kind of go down that road and you feel like, well, I'm sort of committed now, and if I back out of it now, it's going to be even worse. And so I just keep on, it develops some momentum on its own. And I'm not talking about just Donald Trump specifically, but whenever you kind of try to engage to take on something this momentous, I think maybe there's a point at which you're like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound sort of thing.
Yeah, we've invested so much. Or you do get sort of, and this is the human nature thing, and I don't, whether you want to call it conspiracy theory or just human nature, sort of the blinders on that there must be something there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I just haven't found it yet. I just have to keep looking harder. That's a possibility. Now with the warrant thing, I think obviously what they could have done is, well, they just let it expire and not renew it. You don't have to go back to the court. I mean, I should say you don't have to go back to, you really should go back to the court and say, sorry, we lied to you. But if they wanted to get it out of that easily, they just could have, not renewed it. And at the same token, I mean, listen, there was a whole, Mueller investigation that arose out of this, because allegedly Trump fired Comey because Comey was going to get too close and find out that he was a Russian agent. And, this dominated our politics and our discussion for a couple of years. And really there was nothing there. And to me, I think, I think Durham is a smart guy and realized this wasn't something you're going to get big convictions on. But by forcing the issue, you forced some of this information out into the public. Although, I'll go out frankly and say, listen, the media did not want to report on, and I think still doesn't want to report on, because it makes them look silly, because they got they got duped.
Well, yeah, you and I might disagree a little bit on that. I guess I would say that Durham, at least during this last week, seemed to have been a little bit frustrated, right? Treating some of his own witnesses basically as pretty hostile in questioning when
but
they
you expect that.
Yeah, so I mean, but that kind of goes to my larger point is once you get really invested in this and you spend years of your life, because remember, this started back in May of 2019 when Bill Barr asked Durham to do a preliminary review of this, and then in October of 2020, he officially appointed him special counsel. So Durham's put years of his life into this, and just seeing it kind of peter out without hardly any significant convictions, that's, I'm sure you got to look back at, if you're Durham, especially if you think people were guilty and I just don't quite have what I need to prove that.
Yeah.
That's a very frustrating sort of thing.
Yeah, but keep in mind, most of the claims all come down to the lying to the FBI.
Yeah, exactly.
Claims.
Exactly.
And what I think he showed, and for example, the claim that was dismissed just Friday had to do with, the accusation was Danchenko denied talking to did you ever, talk to the FBI about this? And he said, no. And well, he emailed them.
Yeah. So technically,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Man, to me, that's sort of like, wow, in your face, John Durham. You know what I mean? I think Durham can say, yeah, okay. I think I'll still chalk that up as a win, even though it's a dismissed claim.
Yeah.
He proved his point. That, look, if this guy's going to be a Weasley enough to say, it was an email. Well, you know what I mean? So he do so with a Russian accent, of course.
I think bottom line, Jay, that I will say that I think then Attorney General Barr was right to appoint a special counsel. I said that from the beginning. And I think that this, what Durham has found really didn't surprise me. I think from the beginning, it seemed like there were corners cut. This was a sloppy investigation and probably not a whole lot more than that in my view. So this kind of played out, I think, in a very appropriate sort of way as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree that it's played out in an appropriate sort of way. I would disagree on the conclusion because the thing that comes out to me throughout this is that the claims are all somebody lied to the FBI, and part of the defense, and it's been successful, but it's also part of Durham's point is that the FBI either wanted to be lied to, or was okay with being lied to, or wasn't going to look into things that strenuously.
And that's one of those things that you.
And to me, that's the damning point here.
Yeah, it's one of those things that maybe if you're Durham, but you can't prove, right? And so it's got to be deeply frustrating when you say, "Come on, we know the FBI wasn't that naive," but that's pretty difficult legally to kind of demonstrate. So, absolutely. Right, so Jay, I realize we're about at an hour, and this has been the Donald Trump show. So I think maybe
he wins. Donald always wins.
It really does seem that way. But I will say that when we go into our midweek supporters show, which we're going to be recording in just a minute, we will get to, in fact, almost all non-Donald Trump stuff. I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about inflation and OPEC Plus, which we really wanted to get to, but also something I'm very interested in talking about, the Dormant Commerce Clause as it applies to California and pork regulations, and a bunch of other stuff. Jay, I think we had a lot of listener feedback about our comments on marijuana last week. We were not nearly pro-pot enough, I think, for a lot of listeners. You would have
thought everybody would have been more mellow about that.
Well, we're going to get to that. So we have a lot of stuff on the bonus show. If you are a supporter, you'll be getting that on Tuesday. If you're not a supporter, you can still get that by becoming a supporter, or by going to patreon.com/politicsguys, or you can support us on Venmo or at politicsguys. You can also support the show through PayPal. All of our support links are in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And As always, if finances are an issue, but you'd like to get that midweek show, just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you set up with all of our content. And whether you're
fighting inflation,
there you
that's
go.
What you're doing.
That's right. Absolutely. We have not raised our prices in years,
Yes.
so yeah, we are holding the line. Anyway, but whether you're a supporter or not, it would be really great. We'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to the show, rate and review us on the podcast app that you're using to listen, and share episodes on social media. That helps us out a lot. And finally, a special thanks, as always, to our executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope to join us.